Good morning, everyone. Today is July 17th, 2021, and we are going over knowing your rights when stopped by law enforcement. This is our third session of our Know Your Rights topic, and we have not yet had our domestic violence discussion. We are still having that. It had to be rescheduled due to our speaker not being available for the day. But today, this is our third session, and next Saturday, we will be moving to mental and physical health. So let's get started. So, what to do if you're stopped by the police? I'm Erin Van, and I will be your speaker today. You see me every Saturday as your host. Today, we'll be talking about knowing your rights and just those basic things you should know when being stopped and having a conversation with law enforcement. It's a very difficult experience for a lot of people to have interactions with the police. It's a stressful experience, especially for minorities. So, today, we're going to talk about the law requirements in general and offer some options while dealing with police encounters. The burden of de escalation does not fall on citizens, it falls on police officers. But we know all too well we cannot assume officers will behave in a way that protects you, your safety, and respect your rights even if you continuously assert them. That sometimes can lead to a more hostile situation. So today we're going to try to talk about how to reduce that risk and try to keep ourselves safe when we are dealing with situations that are as stressful as this. So these are the top tips. Think carefully. Anything you can say to the police will be used against you. We will talk about Miranda rights later, but you always want to think carefully before you speak because this situation can come down the line and you can have a court date and now they're using things that you said out of pure like frustration or just being confused. So just think carefully. Don't argue with the police. I think that goes perfectly with thinking carefully. You don't want to get yourself into a hostile situation. Like I said, there's already situations we have seen where police don't protect and or respect your rights. So you have to think about your safety first. So try not to argue with the police. As we just discussed, anything you say or do can be used against you. Please keep your hands where the police can see you. Don't run. Don't touch any police officer. Don't resist. Even if you think you're innocent, you didn't do anything. I know some people can get upset when they feel like they're being blamed for something they didn't do. And then you have someone sitting there accusing you. Don't resist. Don't get frustrated. Just be as calm as possible. And I know that's hard. I know it's hard, but that is what we try to do to keep ourselves safe. Don't complain. I know it's a free country. Don't complain. Just try to get the situation over as fast as possible. Don't make any statements. Um, you have the right to remain silent. You will hear me say that over and over. Here, use it. Always invoke your right to remain silent. Ask for a lawyer if they decide to detain you. Um, Write down everything you remember from this encounter. Try to find witnesses so they can back up your story. And if you are injured in the process, please take as many photographs as possible. Hey, Vicky. We just started up and we're talking about what to do when stopped by police. And we're on the first slide, and this is just the overall big tips that I thought was the most important to really get that out there first. Thinking carefully about what you're saying. Don't get into an argument with the police. Keep your hands where the police can see them. and things like that. And I'll try to dive deeper into it. If you have any questions, please let me know. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is the do's. So, when you're first pulled over by the police, these are the do's. You ask them if you're free to go. If they tell you no, you are now being kind of detained. So, you have the right to know why you're being stopped. As I stated before, you try not to get hostile because at the end of the day, you're trying to protect your safety, but you do have the right to know. So, as calmly as possible, ask why you're being stopped. Um, and it is a whole different situation if a police officer refuses to tell you. Usually, you just try to stay calm, remain silent, and try to get out the situation. Like I said, always exercise your right to remain silent. You have to identify yourself if driving, which we'll touch on a little later. But if you're just stopped by the police, walking down the street, and you have to identify yourself. In some states, they can detain you for not identifying yourself. But besides that, you can exercise your right to remain silent. And do not agree with searches. There are police officers who ask questions in confusing ways, whereas, do you mind if I search your car? The answer to that question is yes, but you're thinking the answer is no because you do not want them to search your car, but you do mind. So the answer is yes. And even if you're confused on how that question is being asked, you say, yes, I do mind that you search my car. I do not want you to search my car. Make sure you get out that you do not consent to a search. Because at that point, if they do not have the right amount of probable cause, they cannot search because you have not given them that consent. And if you're given a ticket, like I said, you do have to identify yourself. You have to give them your name and your birthday and sign the ticket. Don'ts. Don't disrespect a police officer. You have constitutional rights as a free citizen, but as we talked earlier, your safety is your top concern. That's what you are trying to make sure, making sure you get out of this situation. So any arguing, any complaining, if you're frustrated, and you usually talk like a sailor, when you're frustrated, don't do it with the police. It might lead to an unreasonable situation, but it might, at the end of the day, put your safety in danger. Don't run away. Don't physically resist. Even if you say you don't consent to the search and they try to search you, don't, like we said earlier, don't try not to touch any police officers. So you don't want to push them. You don't want to try to physically resist, even though you have not consented to that search. Don't lie. Just stay silent, because anything you say can be used against you. And if you're lying to the police, it looks suspicious. So remain silent. And if you have to say anything, say you want a lawyer. And police are allowed legally to lie, intimidate, and it is used as tactics to try to get guilty people to confess. And that's how you do see some innocent people getting arrested for things they did not do, because they do use these tactics. And sometimes, especially with kids, they're more likely to confess to something they did not do because of the pressure of an adult and an authority figure telling them, hey, we know you did this. So remain silent. So these are for our drivers. If you're stopped in a car, have your license and registration and proof of insurance, because those are the things you need to drive anyway. So if you cannot give those to an officer when pulled over, you might be arrested. Just like when identifying yourself, if you can't give name and birthday information, they might be able to hold you. Same thing when driving in a car. So they may ask you your name if you've been properly detained, and you can be arrested for refusing. And I will keep repeating that because I know some people, when they think of the right to remain silent, they believe they don't have to give their name, they don't have to give any of this identifying information. But a lot of the ways they try to reason this is, if you do not give these identifying information, they don't know if you're a threat, if you have a warrant, or if like all these other things. So identification, please identify yourself, and then you can exercise your right to remain silent. And the only way you can try to not give your name is if you believe your name is incriminating, which is usually in situations where people do have warrants or they don't have driver's licenses and they're driving. So you're then pretty much saying you're guilty of committing a crime by giving your name. So you can then claim the right to remain silent, but you're probably going to be arrested. So when you're arrested, ask for a lawyer. And while driving, please keep your hands visible where police officers can see them. We have seen videos where police officers have still shot and killed people with hands on the steering wheel. So I am not saying this is 100% guarantee, but it at least some way, some shape or form shows I have nothing in my hands. If my hands are right on the steering wheel where you can see them, or right above my head, you can see I don't have anything in my hand. So again, don't consent to searches, because if they search your car under your consent and they find something, you can then be arrested because you consented to that search. Sign tickets. If you get a speeding ticket, sign it. DUIs, they're going to arrest you because they can't let you legally drive after you field test for DUI. Also, make sure you try to keep unnecessary objects out of your car, because there are situations where police officers have searched a car without consent and found other things. So then that constitutional right of consensual searches kind of got thrown out the window because of this arbitrary probable cause to search. So it's just best to really exercise your right to remain silent, try to not move, and then ask for an attorney if you are being detained. Does anybody have any questions so far? I know I'm giving a lot. So let's move on to the don'ts. So the don'ts for being stopped in a car. Like we said earlier, don't physically resist. I think that's in any encounter you have with a police officer. You try to not physically resist. You just try. I don't even know the word for it. It's a training we then have to give ourselves, because we speak about how police officers are trained to do certain things, but we have seen police officers say also that they forgot their training because they were scared in a situation or anything. So we can't forget ours to protect ourselves. So just try to stay calm. It is a stressful situation, especially with everything going on in the country. Soon as you think you're about to be pulled over, you start to feel your heart racing. Just calm down, breathe. The calmer you are, the better the situation can possibly be. And like we've said before, try not to argue, try not to get hostile. Don't bribe the officer. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. If you get pulled over, turn your music down. I usually just turn my stereo off altogether. And I crack the window. I don't roll it all the way down. And then I wait to the officer to speak. Even during the pandemic, I even put on my mask. So that is something I know people might have a struggle with when getting pulled over and trying to not move, because you usually don't drive with the mask. If you're the only person or the people in the car you're cool with and have been around, you might not have a mask. But if an unknown police officer is coming up to you, you want to put on a mask. And I think that has been my struggle Dealing with situations of getting pulled over in my car, I want to automatically put on my mask, but I don't want to move. So what I usually do is I crack the window when they come, and when they speak, I ask, "Can I put on my mask?" Which is usually in my passenger seat. They say yes, and then I put it on. Then, so that is a way to also do it. Um, don't try not to have anything hanging from your rearview mirrors, because that in itself, for some reason, can give police officers a reason to pull you over. And then we're gonna watch a little video on Miranda rights.
Do you even know you have the right to remain silent? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent.
Walter White, right to remain silent. Most people know their Miranda rights from TV and movies. The right to remain silent, the right to your own attorney, and the right to a free attorney if you can't afford one. But what?
Do you even know the Miranda rights?
You have the right to remain silent.
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to remain silent.
Walter White, right to remain silent. Most people know their Miranda rights from TV and movies. The right to remain silent, the right to your own attorney, and the right to a free attorney if you can't afford one. But why do people have these rights? What could they mean for you if you're ever accused of a crime? Well, let's run through 3 big myths about Miranda rights. The first myth is that federal law requires people be read their rights. There actually is no law on this. Instead, Miranda rights are based on the Bill of Rights, which the founders wrote to protect a citizen from being forced to be a witness against him.
So that was a little video I've seen a couple of times, and I always think it's a really good short video that just debunks a couple of myths about your Miranda rights. So once you Miranda rights go into effect once you start a custodial interrogation. A custodial interrogation is once you are in custody of the police and they start asking you questions that can potentially incriminate you. Um, you have the right to remain silent. I think that has been my trending thing with asking for a lawyer. So always remember you have the right to remain silent and you always want to exercise it. And hopefully you never have to hear your Miranda rights being read to you, but here they are. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me? So those last two questions are just as important as the rights that are explained, especially with kids. If you do not understand the right to remain silent, what that really entails, what you do have to answer, what you don't have to answer, what it means, like that you have the right to an attorney. What do you know what it means? Like, do you know how to ask for an attorney if you can't afford one? If you do not understand those things, then you don't understand your rights. So you can say no. Can you can you explain? Can somebody else explain exactly what this means? Because at the end of the day, this is something that has been put into our laws where you have to have these rights read to you. But if you do not understand them, it does not help if somebody reads them, because you can still end up speaking, and those statements you make can later be used to incriminate you just because you didn't understand what really the right to remain silent is. So before we get to the last section, which is if you are actually arrested, I want to see if there are any questions. All right. So, like I said before, identifying yourself, name and address. You don't have to give any explanations, excuses, stories. You can talk to your lawyer and you got they can come up with a defense and talk to the police about all of that. You do not have to explain yourself. You have your right to remain silent. Please exercise it. As an attorney, I think that is one of the things a lot of people don't realize. Yes, silence is the absence of words, but the right to remain silent is very, very crucial because your words can be twisted. They will be twisted. So just be quiet and ask for a lawyer. Next bold point, ask to see a lawyer immediately. So if you can't pay for one, like the Miranda rights said, if you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. That's usually through the public defender's office, and the police will figure out how to contact. Just say, hey, I don't have a lawyer, but I want a lawyer. That's it. And you stop talking. Because one thing people also don't realize, once you exercise the right to have a lawyer, you might have exercised your right to remain silent, but you can still revoke these rights. If you ask for a lawyer, or if you say, I would like to remain silent, and then you start talking before your lawyer gets there, or no one asked you a question, you just decided to start talking to the officers, they now can talk to you because you decided to revoke your right to remain silent. If your attorney shows up, they do have to let you know, but you have revoked these rights. You were saying, I will speak to you without an attorney by starting to start a conversation up again without any questions being asked about the investigation or whatever is going on. You also have the right to make a local phone call within the reasonable time after your arrest. Reasonable is very arbitrary, so that is a little difficult in not really sure exactly what to say about that. But you can request your phone call within that reasonable time. You can call your lawyer, which is the first person you should always call. You can call a bail bondsman or a relative or anyone else. And then also, you do not want to make any decisions at all in your case until you've talked to a lawyer. So even if you are able to bail out, you want to talk to a lawyer first. You want to speak to a lawyer. That's always the first thing you want to do. And your calls, assume they are recorded. They cannot record calls with lawyers, but assume all calls are recorded. We've had issues before where there were some constitutional violations through old systems where they were listening to calls they were not supposed to be listening to. So assume that all calls are recorded. And last but not least, I know this is a lot of information, but this will go on our YouTube. If you ever want to go back, stop it, look at some of these slides again, watch the video again. Um, but we're gonna move on to if the police come into your home. Um, Yet again, I think the do's are pretty self-explanatory now. The general ones: don't try not to be hostile. Make sure you don't consent to anything, um, and you can identify yourself. But that's about it. Try to just make the conversation and the encounter as short as possible. So if the police knock and ask to enter your home, you do not have to let them come in unless they have a warrant. Once you let them come in and they want to take a look around, that is you consenting to a search. Never consent to the search of your home. Tell them go get a warrant. In emergency situations, the police can enter a home. So if there is someone who is clearly in need of help inside the home, the police can come inside. And if there are things like, say, there are drugs laying on the counter while they walk in because they know someone needs help, they can then arrest you because they came in during emergency situation. So that is one circumstance that does not require a warrant or consent. So yeah, make sure you try to get a person out of your house if it's an emergency situation, or at least call an ambulance to get some emergency people instead of the police in your house. Unless it's impossible to avoid, then try to stay in one area. And it's not even if you're doing something illegal, it's just the privacy of your home. You don't want, even when police officers walk in, they just are automatically going to start looking around. So you want to try to keep some of that privacy. Try to maybe step on the front porch if possible. And then that way they aren't in the home. So then you don't have to consent to anything, or there isn't any misunderstanding of if you consented. If you have like a mud room before like the rest of your house, try to stay there, or go in a public area where you usually have company and you're okay with them going. So yeah. But for the most part, try to keep the police out of your home, because then you can have miscommunication of consent to searches. And our final slide: always remember to exercise your right to remain silent. Always ask for a lawyer, and you do not have to consent to a search of yourself, your car, or your house. If you do consent to these searches, that information, whatever they find, can be used later in court against you. So do not, do not consent. Even if you think you're fine and you think that consent is going to help this situation, don't do it. Just try to get a lawyer. And with your home, if they say they have a warrant, look, ask to see the warrant, because warrants sometimes specifically state certain parts of the house they can search, or it might say they can actually search the car, not the house. So make sure you read a warrant. If a police officer ever walks up and say, hey, we have a warrant, ask to see it. And do not interfere with or obstruct the police, because you can be arrested. And I think that is a big plethora of things. Try not to make the situation hostile. Try not to physically touch a police officer. Try to make sure your voice is calm. And I know this all sounds crazy, but as minorities, we do go through our version of training. And this is me just trying to help us stay safe, because at the end of the day, we are the ones that protect our safety. So this is just me trying to help. If you have any questions, please contact me. There's my email. If you need any help, if you have any, like, if you feel like your rights have been violated by the police, there's the number. It's the ACLU hotline. They're great. They have a whole bunch of articles and different PDFs with do's and don'ts on being stopped by the police, your rights, and different things like that. And these are the links to different websites I used for the resources for our presentation and a couple of those PDFs, just so you guys can have like a little one-sheeter to just see and go back and just go over those rights. And in your free time, try to read it and try to see like, hey, make it second nature. So when you are in that situation, maybe it'll give you at least a bit of a peace of mind. So thank you all. Is there any questions for me?